If I were to recommend a hidden high-scoring gem, I would definitely recommend this Korean movie. For reckless young men, still naive and impulsive, actually robbed a gangster's casino in broad daylight, showing the most extreme way of courting disaster. What's even more surprising is that the film's subject is not only incredibly fresh, but through the story, you can clearly feel just how tragic the lives of young people in that era truly were. So without further ado, let's dive into the main story. The story takes place in Seoul in the year 2030. On this day, Jang Ho and Ki Hoon come to pick up their best friend who has just been released from prison. To celebrate Jun-suk's release, the three of them go to an underground bar. But to Jang Ho and Ki Hoon's surprise, instead of indulging in a wild night, Jun-suk can't wait to start talking about his dream. It turns out that during his time in prison, he met a smuggler boss, who also runs many legitimate businesses in a place in Taiwan, China called Kenting. Because Kenting has emerald green waters, many people say it is also a kind of Hawaii. And that is exactly the kind of place he longs to live in. To help Jun-suk realize his long-held dream, the boss promised that if he came to find him after being released, he would sell him one of the shops for a very low price of $200,000. And the boss guaranteed he could earn at least $8,000 every month, so he hoped his two friends would come along as well. But even though Jun-suk spoke with such confidence and passion about his dream, Jang Ho and Ki Hoon were unmoved. After leaving the bar, the two finally told Jun-suk that because of the impact of the financial crisis, the entire country had become corrupt and hopeless. First, the price of gold had fallen to a historic low, while the cost of living had risen so high that ordinary people could no longer afford it. And with the exchange rate skyrocketing, almost everything had to be paid in US dollars, making nearly every city filled with filth and crime in the air. Although some riot police occasionally came out to suppress unrest, from the way the country continued to decay, it was clear there was no hope of recovery. Although this reality caught Jun-suk off guard, it only made him more determined to leave. To help his brothers escape this misery as well, the next day Jun-suk suddenly made a proposal to the two of them.
마지막으로 큰 건 하나 할까?
진짜 미친 새끼네 이거.
어딜 출소한 새끼가 진짜. 깜빵에 절대 안 가는 아이템이야.
아 웃기지 마.
진짜야.
정도야.
When faced with their questions, Jun-suk did not answer immediately, which made them think he was only joking. But that evening, Jun-suk took the two of them to an underground casino. And before he could even explain his purpose, he grabbed the hand of one of the workers and dragged him out of the casino. It turns out Sang-soo was also Jun-suk's friend, but in the past he had stolen $10,000 from him, and now Jun-suk demanded that Sang-soo return the money in full. But as a low-paid service worker, Sang-soo naturally couldn't come up with that kind of money, and upon hearing this, Jun-suk immediately stated his condition.
저거.
도박장?
For Jang Ho and Ki Hoon, Jun-suk's outrageous words were utterly insane, not to mention that the casino was run by gangsters who would surely tear them apart and leave them dead on the street. And right now they didn't even have weapons to rob with. But Jun-suk insisted that based on his investigation, the places with the most US dollars in circulation were banks and underground casinos. And compared to banks, casinos were much easier to hit. And as for weapons, he said there was no need to worry, because in prison he had gotten to know an arms dealer.
3년을 잃었어, 씨발. 너 얼마나 더 일해야 정신 차릴래?
어차피 우리 더는 잃을 것도 없잖아.
Realizing there was no way to stop Jun-suk, after a night of painful inner struggle, and for the chance to escape this vortex and live a better life, the three could only agree to join Jun-suk's plan. With the support of his brothers, Jun-suk immediately began preparing the robbery plan. First they scouted the area around the casino, then went inside to observe the layout, and finally tested the driving time needed for their escape. After confirming the plan was indeed feasible, Jun-suk led the three of them to the arms dealer, ready to spend all their money on weapons for the heist. Hearing that all four of them were complete rookies, Bong-sik firmly recommended a certain gun, emphasizing that his own brother had once fought his way out using this very weapon. The four didn't hesitate at all and accepted his advice, although he couldn't control what Jun-suk was planning to do. As a seasoned veteran of the underworld, Bong-sik still offered them a few words of advice.
준석아.
네.
법 밖에 있는 세상이 더 무서운 거다. 신중하게 조심해서 하고.
To ensure the robbery would go smoothly, the four immediately tested their guns one by one, and even took a valuable group photo together. But little did they know, this would turn out to be their last time captured in the same frame. With everything ready, that night the four headed straight for the casino, and although they had already braced themselves mentally, a sense of unease still crept into their hearts. According to the planned route, they soon reached the rooftop of the casino, where they put on protective gear and climbed down the windows, successfully arriving at the entrance. But at this crucial moment, Jun-suk couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger, because he knew that once the lock was blasted open, there would be no turning back. Clearly, all his bold words from before now seemed meaningless in this very moment. Under the threat of heavy weapons, the security guards didn't dare to make a move. But just when the four thought they had the situation under control, a casino dealer secretly pressed the alarm. The four realized that the gang members would arrive soon, so they had to speed up the robbery. And although this was their first crime, luckily Jun-suk had planned everything carefully, and their teamwork was well organized. At that moment, one of the guards suddenly hurled a threat at them.
니들은 이러고도 무사할 거 아니야? 니들이 지금 뭔 짓 하는지 알고 하는 거냐고. 니들 다 죽은 목숨이야.
Faced with the guard's provocation, the four could only ignore it, because once they started, there was no way back. Very soon the safe was completely emptied, and under Jun-suk's constant urging, the four immediately escaped along their planned route. Although the gang members had already arrived, fortunately they never expected that Jun-suk and his group would choose a different escape route. After a thrilling chase, the four narrowly escaped the scene, and once they confirmed no one was pursuing them, they burst into joy like little children. Yet what they didn't know was that they had already booked themselves a ticket to meet death. To prevent Sang-soo from being discovered and caught, Jun-suk suggested that he escape to Taiwan with them, but Sang-soo refused, saying that suddenly quitting his job would only raise suspicion with the casino, so he thought the best choice was to wait until things calmed down before heading to Taiwan. But what neither of them expected was that this brief farewell would turn out to be their final parting, since the smuggling boat wouldn't arrive until early the next morning, and with only Ki-hoon's parents still alive among them, Jun-suk decided to pay them a visit and stay overnight at Ki-hoon's home. After eating and drinking their fill, the three couldn't help but dream about their future, yet no one could have imagined that their hopes would soon be shattered. Meanwhile, the crime boss's top cleaner, Han, had already received his orders and arrived in Seoul. To make those responsible for the failure pay the price, Han eliminated all the security guards. Then using his sharp experience, he tracked down Bong-sik, the man dealing in weapons, bluntly stating he wouldn't ask whether any guns had been sold. As the saying goes, in this life, loyalty matters above all, so Bong-sik had no choice but to feign ignorance and deny everything.
니네 보고 그 짐작 가는 거 없냐?
아니요. 저희도 뭐 사장님 너무 많은 걸 걸지 마세요. 그냥 아는 거 솔직하게 얘기하면 아무 일 없이 일상으로 돌아갈 수 있어요.
지금 나 협박하는 거야? 나도 믿는 구석이 있는 사람이야. 넌 무사할 것 같아?
Realizing Bong-sik wasn't going to cooperate, Han decided to drop all pretenses. He soon returned to the pool hall, and before Bong-sik's men could react, Han suddenly pulled the trigger and took one of them out. At that moment, Bong-sik finally understood what it truly meant when people say, "The most dangerous men speak the least." Meanwhile, as Jun-suk and his friends were happily taking a walk, Bong-sik's phone call suddenly came through. Although Bong-sik pretended to be checking in with concern, once he began subtly probing about their location, Jun-suk instantly sensed something was wrong. Seeing that he couldn't get a precise address, Han didn't waste time. He simply hung up the phone. Jun-suk immediately called back, wanting to confirm the situation, but the line only rang unanswered, filling him with dread. And that dread soon became reality. Right after Han returned to his car, the pool hall exploded the very next second. Because of Bong-sik's unusual display of concern, Jun-suk became restless, and he began to worry about Sang-soo's safety. To calm his unease, he quickly called Sang-soo to check in, and although nothing seemed wrong at the time, perhaps due to the overwhelming pressure, that night Jun-suk dreamed Sang-soo was killed. Telling himself it was only a dream, he called Sang-soo again, but after several unanswered calls, his anxiety grew even stronger. Unfortunately, his fears had already come true, because after speaking with Jun-suk during the day, when Sang-soo was about to head to work, the gang members were already watching him, and Sang-soo immediately realized the danger. To avoid the worst, he used the excuse of needing the restroom and escaped through the vent. But when he returned to the hideout to grab the money, planning to flee Seoul overnight, He didn't expect that Han had been waiting for him all along. At the same time, completely unaware, Jun-suk kept dialing Sang-soo's phone, and just as his frustration mounted, Sang-soo's number suddenly called him back. But no one spoke before the line was cut. Cursing under his breath, Jun-suk dialed again, only to hear the ringtone echoing from a nearby booth. And as he saw the man answering the call while his own phone connected, Jun-suk instantly realized disaster had arrived. Forcing himself to stay calm, he quickly paid the bill, then rushed back to the room urging his friends to escape at once. To be safe, they hurried to gear up and prepared to steal a car. But when Jang-ho smashed a window with the gun stock, the car alarm blared loudly, sending their hearts racing. Even as Jun-suk and Ki-hoon focused intently, they still feared Han might suddenly appear. Although Jang-ho quickly silenced the alarm and started the car to escape, just as they were about to drive out of the parking lot, Han appeared right in front of them.
그냥 밟아.
After a brutal collision, Jang-ho and Ki-hoon were knocked out cold inside the car. By the time Jun-suk realized what had happened, Han was already at his back like a phantom, his fierce face clear as day, and Jun-suk could only accept fate, slowly closing his eyes. Yet this very act gave him the chance to escape.
재밌네. 기회를 줄게요. 5분. 갈 수 있는 최대한 멀리 한번 가봐요. 실망시키지 말고.
Sensing that Han had left the scene, Jun-suk slammed on the gas and sped away. To save Jang-ho's life, Jun-suk drove to a remote hospital, and fortunately, the night shift nurse successfully removed the bullet from Jang-ho's shoulder. Seeing his brother's life saved, Jun-suk urged that they had to leave at once, but Ki-hoon rejected the idea, arguing that Jang-ho needed rest, and since they had already reached the neighboring city, he was sure Han would never find them. But Ki-hoon had no idea that reality was about to slap him hard. In the middle of the night, Jun-suk was startled awake by another nightmare, and as he turned toward the window in his panic, he saw Han already standing outside the hospital. Jun-suk had no choice but to wake the others immediately, and to buy them time, he deliberately left his phone in the ward, luring Han inside with the sound, only for him to find it empty. Seeing that Han had not come out yet, the three quietly crawled toward the elevator, but as the doors opened, the elevator itself made a sound. Fortunately, the three crouched down and barely escaped a disaster, but before they had time to let out a sigh of relief, the very next second, luckily, death did not take them this time, and the three escaped from the hospital still shaken. At that moment, Ki-hoon noticed that Han's car was still running, so they immediately decided to drive away in it. The three could hardly believe this was reality, but before they could figure out their next move, they discovered something even more frustrating. Unexpectedly, Sang-pyo's car was actually linked to the police network system. Seeing the surveillance footage of the three entering the hospital, Jun-suk suddenly thought that Han might be a cop, but the truth turned out to be far more shocking. Very soon, Han used the big data system to dial Jun-suk's other phone, and since he already knew he was no match, Jun-suk immediately said he would return all the money, but Han calmly replied that money was no longer important. He only wanted to enjoy the thrill of this hunt. It turned out that when Jun-suk told them to take the casino's hard drive to avoid being wanted, they never imagined that it actually contained records of the gang's dealings with VIPs, lists of bribed government officials, and detailed logs of money laundering. So the moment Jun-suk took the hard drive, they had already stirred up unimaginable trouble. Hearing Han's chilling warning, the group felt fear like never before. To get out of the city as quickly as possible, they rushed through the night to the dock. But unfortunately, according to the plan, the boatman would not arrive until the early hours, so the three had no choice but to hide inside a building. But what they overlooked was that hunters often favor such places the most. After trying to comfort one another, the sun slowly set. Yet just as night fell, Ki-hoon decided he had to return to look for his parents. Moments earlier, he had discovered he couldn't reach them by phone, and he was certain they had already been taken by the gang, which indeed turned out to be true. Not wanting Jun-suk to worry, Ki-hoon pretended to be fine, said his goodbyes, and promised that once the storm passed, he would reunite with him. But as Jun-suk watched Ki-hoon's fading figure, he could not feel optimistic at all. What crushed him even more was that when he returned to the building to meet Jang-ho, a strange car appeared at the entrance. His instincts told him Han had once again found them, and in alarm he immediately ran upstairs, only to discover Jang-ho was no longer in the room. After regaining his composure, Jun-suk strapped on his gear and began to search, but Han spotted him first. Though Jun-suk managed to dodge in time, looking through the window, he saw Jang-ho was actually outside, so Jun-suk shouted for him not to come up. But in that moment he himself was cornered by Han. Fortunately, a mannequin on the ground gave Jun-suk an idea for escape. With Jang-ho's cover, Jun-suk managed to flee the building unharmed, but before the two could start the car and drive off, Han appeared behind them like a ghost. Realizing there was no way to escape, Jun-suk decided they had no choice but to fight head-on. To make use of their numbers, Jun-suk told Jang-ho to stay put while he circled around to launch an attack from another angle. Although their aim was not accurate, the brief yet intense gunfights still put some pressure on Han. Seeing the enemy forced into cover, the two thought they might actually win, but they were far too naive, because Han used just a single wooden board to seize the chance and wounded Jun-suk. Watching his brother collapse to the ground, Jang-ho was consumed with rage. Seeing Jun-suk in a frenzy, Han chose to retreat for the moment, perhaps unwilling to let the game end so quickly, and he deliberately allowed Jun-suk to carry Jang-ho away. But with blood pouring endlessly, all Jun-suk could do was place Jang-ho inside a restaurant. Looking at his dying brother, Jun-suk regretted his decisions bitterly, and as Jang-ho drew his final breath, Jun-suk resolved to turn grief into fury. But the outcome was clear. An amateur could never overcome a professional. Just as everything seemed to be over, a car suddenly appeared. Although Han was indeed a top killer, facing the mercenaries' fierce gunfire, he too became the prey. Trying to reverse the situation, Han attempted to use shipping containers for cover, but against absolute firepower, any resistance was futile. Realizing the game was over, Han, unwilling to accept defeat, walked toward the dock. When he removed his mask, Jun-suk finally learned the truth. He was actually Bong-sik's twin brother. With the ordeal seemingly over, Jun-suk boarded the boat alone and arrived in Taiwan, the place he had dreamed of. Though life now seemed peaceful, Jun-suk was plagued by nightmares, often haunted by visions of Jang-ho's death. Perhaps longing to share this burden, Jun-suk asked the older boss he knew to investigate whether Ki-hoon was still alive in Korea. But the boss only gave him another piece of news. Han had not actually died, and upon returning, he mobilized some police to wipe out Bong-sik's brother's entire organization. Though the boss never mentioned Ki-hoon, Jun-suk's sharp instincts told him that his last hope had already been crushed, and if Han was still alive, then no matter where he went, even to the ends of the earth, Han would eventually find him again. With no other choice, Jun-suk decided to face it head-on, and to rid himself of the fear inside, he began training hard with every kind of weapon, and when his accuracy finally reached nearly perfect, he believed the time for revenge had come.
너가 살아있다면 볼 수 있겠지? 그자가 절대 벗어날 수 없다고 했던 말 기억하지? 그자 말이 맞았어. 내가 이곳에 있어도 내가 어디에 있든 간에 그 지옥에서는 절대 벗어날 수 없어. 나 다시 돌아갈 거야. 그자도 다시 찾아갈 거야. 더는 도망가지 않아. 싸울 거야. 내가 있을 곳이야.